Sunday morning in Rome, and we've had a good night's sleep after about 27 hours of travel, and we're getting ready to leave our hotel room, which looks over this nice little courtyard, and we're going to walk down the street toward the Termini train station where we'll catch the city bus. The sidewalks here are all cobblestones, and we came upon this little continuously running fountain that must be hooked up to a spring just for public water access. The Termini train station is absolutely huge, many blocks long, and lots and lots and lots of people. Lots of train platforms with trains going from here to all places in Europe. Sort of like modern airports, there are all sorts of shops and department stores attached to the train station. This old tower has a definite list to the left. Crossing the Tiber River. Interesting little stand here with all sorts of religious icons and statues. This is St. Peter's Basilica. And there is the Pope. Just after noon, services are over. Thousands of people are walking out away from the Vatican. We're on the edge of the Tiber River, in Italian Tevere. We're in front of Castel d'Angelo, otherwise known as Hadrian's tomb. From here you can see the Vatican and the Cathedral of St. Peter's. See, it's very close to Castel Sant'Angelo. Elaborate decorations of the architecture on some of these buildings is just amazing. Wish we had more of these little smart cars in the USA. They're only about half the size of a regular car. In this green valley is the Circus Maximus. It can hold as many as 300,000 people. Right in the middle of the city, surrounded by modern buildings on old Roman temples. BT, I would have bought you one of these, but the store was closed. It was Sunday, sorry. There's the Via Tritone. Lots of street vendors selling rip-offs of Gucci bags. It's amazing the number of motorcycles and motor scooters that are parked until you realize that parking is a terrible problem, and this is a wonderful solution. There is a huge crowd here that has everybody's attention. People are taking pictures, milling around. So, what's the big attraction? It's just the most popular fountain in Rome. This is Trevi. All the good-looking people gather here. After dark, the streets light up, tourists wandering all over, and sidewalk cafes full. We're going to head down here and look for a place to have some dinner. Just as beautiful at night. And just as crowded. Ham cheese sandwich and a glass of Italian beer. Just the right meal. Back on the bus, headed for the train station. Rome is indeed a city of lights, beautifully lit at night. It's Monday, and a short walk from our hotel, we found this park on a hill with this large remains of a building called Domus Aurea, which means the Gold House, the elaborate residence of the Roman Emperor Nero. Said it was called the Gold House because he had the entire outside of the main house covered with gold leaf. Nero's estate was vast, originally stretching down and across this valley past where the Colosseum is, you see now, and up the hill on the other side. It's said that where the Colosseum is now, there was an artificial lake that was later filled in to build the Colosseum. All the area where we've been walking is built over vast underground rooms and passages. The Colosseum is really huge. You can't fit it all in one picture. So we're going to walk around it first and then head over toward the Roman Forum. The Constantine Arch, just less than 100 yards from the Colosseum, commemorates the official change of religion in Rome to Christianity. The road to the Forum, in fact, many Roman roads were paved with these large flat stones that have lasted for thousands of years. From the archway at the top of this hill, you look down again into this little valley where you can see the ruins of the Roman Forum. It's interesting that the columns on the left have been incorporated into the structure of a church that was built on the site of the old Roman temple. These huge arches are all that remains of a giant basilica or meeting house. These three side rooms are just the left side of the building, the only part that's left standing. It was started by Maximus and had a huge statue of him in it. And it was completed by Emperor Constantine, the same one for whom the arch was built. And of course he immediately replaced the statue with one of his own. It was never used as a church, even though Constantine declared Christianity the formal religion, but was rather used as a giant meeting hall. Back on along the Via Sacra, Sacred Way, to the next site. It was common practice to build temples to living emperors who were thought of as gods. And this old temple is no exception. It's well preserved because it was incorporated into the construction of a church that you can see inside the temple columns. And if you look carefully, these grooves on the columns are thought to be where cables were attached in an attempt to actually pull down the columns after the church was built about 600 AD. The Temple of Saturn is the oldest structure in the Forum, and it's interesting, it has the most columns still remaining. On the way back, we're stopping at the Piazza Vittorio Emanuele, walking through the shopping arcade. All through this arcade there are ladies telling fortunes using tarot cards. We have joined the morning rush early, about 8 o'clock, headed for the Vatican Museum. Subways are absolutely packed. It's a relief to be out in the fresh air again after the crowded quarters of the subway. That's only a short walk to the walls of the Vatican. Today we visit the Vatican Museum, but first we have to deal with this long line. Goes off around the corner, and the line goes all the way down this block and around the corner and down the next block as far as I can see. Well, we finally found the end of the line. It's about 8 blocks long. We've been waiting about 40 minutes and we're almost halfway through the line. There's an incredible collection of all sorts of kinds of art in the Vatican Museum. Here's an almost 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummy. The Vatican Museum has over 4 miles of corridors and galleries. So I suspect we won't see it all today. There's one whole wing of Greek and Roman statues. There's a wonderful view of the city from here. Vittorio Emanuele monument. Casco Sant'Angelo. Oh no! My battery says it's almost out. I may not get many more pictures. All this is inlaid marble of different colors. The scope and depth of this thing is unbelievable. This one passage on one side just seems to go on forever. Everybody talks about the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. This ceiling in this gallery just goes on forever, with statues sticking out from it, incredible decorations, paintings on every square inch of it. It goes on for several hundred yards. This huge mural depicts the Battle of Constantine's victory over Maxencio. Constantine, of course, was the one that made Christianity the official religion of Rome. This is just one of Raphael's frescoes, all done with colored plaster instead of paint. Headed now for the Basilica of St. Peter's. Well, here's the next crowd headed into the St. Peter's Basilica. Next stop, top of the dome of St. Peter's. There's the dome, and there are the people looking over the edges. It's so large that you can't even see the people from all the way down on the ground. This is only part of the way up. We finally made it to the top. There's a spectacular view of the city from here. The ancient walls of Rome. There's the backside, the papal grounds.
Oh, that was so
340 steps up and another 347 down. All the other toilets I've seen in Rome are normal, but in the Vatican, a little simpler. Swiss Guard. This streets here, like Madrid, they are really, really busy at night with lots and lots of people walking up and down the sidewalks shopping. It's Wednesday and we're going to explore this extensive ruin that we haven't read much about. These are the ruins of extensive Roman baths, built in about 300 AD and used for about 3 centuries until the Goths sacked Rome, cut the aqueducts that served them. Sort of call it a super gym today. The buildings originally covered an area about 300 yards by 300 yards, and it took 9,000 men about 5 years to build this. There were areas for exercising, and areas to change clothes, and areas to have food and drink. There were hot baths, and medium baths, and cool baths, and icy baths. Something for everybody. This enormous facility was used by as many as 8,000 or 9,000 people daily for the 300 years it was open. When the Goths sacked Rome and cut the aqueduct that supplied this with water is when it fell into disuse. And from that time on, it has been gradually stripped of marble, stripped of statues, stripped of building materials to use in buildings in other places. Many of the elaborate mosaics that made up the floor have been moved to the Vatican Museum. But remnants still remain here and there. The size of this place is just really impressive. Looks like he's riding a fish. Most of the extensive decorations have been stripped to be used elsewhere. Most of the places here it's kind of hard to get an idea of scale, but here you can see the still existing part that's 5 stories tall. Well, before going to the Colosseum, we're going to make a stop at the Palatino, the Palatine Hill. This is remains of an old aqueduct that went to the Terni. Here are the remains of an old temple about 100 yards long. Interesting remains of columns that were made of brick and then faced with stone. This is the remains of a once elaborate fountain, surrounded by walls about 3 stories, 4 stories high. The Palatine Hill overlooks the Circus Maximus. A lone tree now stands where trees lined the center of this huge racetrack where chariot races were staged as many as 12 times a day. This place was capable of seating 250,000 people. History records at one time there was a seating area that collapsed, killing 13,000 people at one time. Old stairways lead from here all the way down to the Roman Forum. Directly below is the temple to Vesta and sections of the Forum that are not accessible to the general public. At the head of the valley that holds the Forum, you see Tito's Arch, and just beyond it, the Colosseum, where we'll head next. We'll now head down the Via Sacra, the sacred way toward the Colosseum. It's fascinating to look at these walls these slanted things that used to hold up the seats for thousands and thousands of people sitting all the way around the edge. The floor of the Colosseum no longer exists. This is where the gladiators fought.
All three of you walk by now.
Originally a wooden floor was over the arena, and then a layer of sand over that. They estimate that over the years that the Colosseum was in use, somewhere around 1 million people died on the floor of this arena. On the upper wall of the stadium you can see the outline of where steep stairs went up to the top level. Originally the whole Colosseum was this high, but a huge chunk of it collapsed during an earthquake. Just across the street from the Colosseum is the Ludus Magnus. This is where the gladiators had their quarters and where they trained. There's a small curved seating here so that spectators could watch the gladiators training, and from here a tunnel led underground to the arena itself. For our last full day in Rome, we've come just outside the old city walls to the park called Villa Borghese, and we're going to go to the gallery here. It's a long walk from the metro through this beautiful park area. There was a private estate to the gallery itself. Here's the main entrance. Well, the Borghese does not allow cameras, so you won't see any of what we saw of the paintings and sculptures, but we walked back out of the Villa Borghese, and we're going through the city walls, headed toward the Spanish Steps. From the inside of the walls, looking out, you can see the ports that people could shoot through. There are probably at least as many motor scooters as there are cars, maybe even more. Because traffic is heavy and parking is at a premium. And the Piazza di Monte at the top of the Spanish Steps is this Egyptian obelisk that was captured and brought here. Top of the Spanish Steps, looking down the street, fades off into the misty afternoon. It looks almost like an impressionist painting. It seems to be a very popular place just to sit. This is a really active shopping area with Gucci, Armani, and every other brand name store you ever could imagine. People swarming all over. This incredible column has a spiral bas-relief that tells the story of a battle won by the Romans from the bottom all the way to the top. Another thing that's interesting that we've seen all over Rome are these fake building fronts. they're doing is covering up scaffolding that's being used to work, and they show the view of the building before the work started. This was originally built as a temple to Hadrian, then became a customs house, and then a stock exchange, and now parts of it have been converted to offices. This little side street has a funny name. It's Via de Burro, which means Butter Street. Clock shop. Could it be Geppetto? There's Pinocchio. This person really likes to work in wood. There's a whole wooden motorcycle. And over here there's a store full of fancy masks. Suddenly all the little dark streets open up into this piazza, and here is the Pantheon, a temple to all of the gods. Definitely another tourist destination. This guy looks like he's looking up at the pigeon on top of his head. Pantheon light comes through an open hole in the top of the dome. Today it's a Christian facility. Mass is celebrated here. These funny little vending stands are all over the place in Rome. Looks just like a regular stand, but if you look carefully, there are wheels on the bottom and little stabilizers that are cranked down to hold it steady during the day. At the end of the day, everything drops down to the sides and they drive away. You don't often see the back side of the Pantheon, which doesn't seem to be in such good repair as the front. The back once had elaborate columns and decorations that have all either fallen off or been stolen off. Another sight you see all over Rome is roast chestnut vendors. Saturday afternoon and yesterday afternoon we took a train for about an hour's ride to the port of Civitavecchia, where we boarded our ship, the Insignia. Civitavecchia is an industrial port as well as a cruise ship port. The main port, in fact, for Rome. So, lots of freighters dock here, as well as ferry boats that go from here to Sardinia, as well as cruise ships of all kinds. An old fort guards the entrance to the inner harbor. And a somewhat newer but still very old fort on the other side of the inner harbor itself. A statue of Santa Fermina, the protector of ports and navigators, stands on a tall column right next to where the ship is docked. The ship itself has 11 decks. Deck 10 contains a spa at the end of the ship, and at the other end a lounge. The 10th deck, just below, has a beautiful swimming pool. Near the bow on deck 10 is a beautiful lounge called Horizons. Forward on this deck are two very elegant dining rooms, Polo Lounge and the Toscana. Also a very nice library with pleasant places to curl up and read a good book. Deck 9 has the tapas terrace for informal eating, and an outdoor terrace looking over the stern of the ship. Forward on deck 9 there's a big fitness center and a luxury spa where you can get facials and massages, a card room, and a computer center. Decks 8, 7, and 6 all have long hallways of staterooms on both sides of the ships, with balconies looking over the water. Deck 5 forward has the theater, where there is nightly entertainment. A small casino that's open when we're out beyond the 3-mile limit, and the lifeboat deck. There's a piano lounge here and a bar. On this level near the center are duty-free shops. A grand staircase down to the next level, and at the aft end the huge grand dining room. Deck 4 has another lounge where the concierge is, and the reception and boarding area. Level 3, with the shortest hall of staterooms, as ours. Spacious and luxurious, with its own porthole. It's 7:30 in the morning on Sunday, the last day of October, and we have dropped anchor offshore from Sorrento on the Amalfi coast. There are no docks here, so we'll be going ashore on lighters. When we get there, we'll be boarding a fast hydrofoil to go to the island of Capri. The tenders that we'll go ashore on are actually lifeboats that have been swung out from Insignia and put in the water. Each one of these will hold about 100 people.
Especially if we can get back a little early. Five or six.
Literally on the edges of the cliff.
We're definitely.
No way. Oh boy. It's been so.
And I keep getting these emails as I'm picking up on the computer. Beyond.
That's what she told me a few days ago, a Japanese to me. Yes, Aisha, did you memorize everybody in the company? Oh, really, Mamma Mia.
We'll be boarding this hydrofoil for the trip to Capri. And we're off again. It's about a half-hour ride. High cliffs drop straight down to the sea. The whole island is only 4 miles long. As one might expect on a village where there are 13,000 inhabitants and about 10,000 visitors per day during the summer, there are lots and lots of shops. From the village of Capri, you can take a boat around the island to visit the Blue Grotto that you can only get in and out of with small rowboats. The opening's only a couple of feet high. Being an Anacapri, which simply means above Capri, it's almost like being in an airplane. It's 1,000 feet higher and the cliff drops straight down. It's still all misty this morning. And as we walk along the top of this cliff, we can see the road that comes up to Anacapri. And away we go, sailing over the rooftops of Anacapri up to the highest point on the island. There are really steep roads going up the hill. Much of the steep hillsides are covered with grapevines. It's a sheer drop here, almost 2,000 feet down to the ocean.
Can you get the Tom down there?
They'll take 1,000 and 2 will go out. You get number 2, I should have number 1.
This is the town of Anacapri. Bye. And down we go again.
Have a look at the back. Wow. Now look at that. The Tiberius jumping is the hill on.
This is the main part of the town of Capri.
31 or 2 ice creams, but 31, 19 point at 2 Municipio, City Hall. Okay, you go your way, Karen. You go your way, Karen.
Houses literally hang on the edges of these cliffs. It's possible to walk down to the beach from here, but it's quite a climb. And we'll head back up the street to take the funiculare back down to the port.
Non guardi?
No, non guardo.
Mamma mia.
Making sure that it's ready.
Just barely visible at this end of the island are the ruins of the palace built by Emperor Tiberius, who ruled Rome from this spot for 11 years. Taking a shuttle bus up from the port to the main square in the city of Sorrento. The entrance to the city is up this steep defile here. This beautiful courtyard is a flower shop. Well, this is a really cool window on the front of this pizzeria. Sorrento is known for its inlaid wood, and these panels at the cathedral are all made of inlaid different colored wood. This is the oldest part of Sorrento here, lined with shops along both sides of the street. Interesting old doorway with a big gate and a small door in the big door. The church here is all lit up at night. And they've closed off this street to traffic and made it just for pedestrians. They're putting out the Christmas decorations. This is a little music box. And an even tinier version of the same one. Time for 6 o'clock Mass. And time for us to head back through Piazza Tasso down toward the Marina Piccola and our boat. Another day. This morning still anchored at Sorrento until about 2 o'clock this afternoon. Shortly we'll be boarding the tender to head for a tour of Pompeii. When we first get off the bus behind the tourist stands, you can already see the walls and buildings of the remains of Pompeii. This originally was just a hill covered with over 30 feet of volcanic ash. This was the original gate that went from the city down to the edge of the water. This was the marine port and the seawall right here. Today the sea is miles away. You can see along the edge of the seawall holes in the stones where the ships tied up. In the almost 2,000 years since then, the subsequent volcanic eruptions have pushed back the sea about 4 miles. We're already walking on the original cobblestone sidewalks. Here's the remains of someone's house. The weight of the ash has caved in all of the roofs. The large stones in the middle of the street, raised above the pavement, were spaced so that chariots could pass through, but people could step across without stepping in horse droppings and sewage that might run during heavy times of rain. All along the side of the main square of the town was this colonnade, the main square of Marketplace and central meeting point. This is what's left of the City Hall, built of brick. Just to its right, the remains of the courthouse. And at the far end of the square, the temple to Jupiter. And behind the temple of Jupiter, Vesuvius. Originally it looked like this. Plaster cast of someone who died, his belt still there, the bones still inside. Being covered so long, even the frescoes on the wall are still protected. In the niches along this street are signs designating what was sold in each of these small shops. Along the front of each store, a groove in the stone for sliding doors. This was the dressing room for the baths and one of the original pools. These were lockers for storing your personal belongings. And here's the baths, or the calidarium, or the hot baths. The city streets were laid out on a grid, north-south and east-west. About 80% of the city of Pompeii has now been excavated over the last couple of hundred years. Here in the street you can see grooves that are the same width as a railway, which was the original width of chariot wheels. Interior courtyard in this house where there was a small garden. Here's the main part of the house and the front door. All of the interior walls stucco with frescoes on them for decoration. Here and there are still remains of old lead pipes, this one for drainage, this one going through the wall, a lead pipe for the running water system inside the house. This is where our word plumber comes from, plumbum, meaning lead. This is the ruins of a house of prostitution, obvious by the symbol up here at the top of the wall. Here's an old oven, similar to pizza ovens today, and millstones for grinding flour. Down this street, there's a fast food counter where trays were, kettles were put in the holes and fire inside to keep them hot. This one's more like a restaurant, because it had a large area to sit down for dining behind. This is like the center of the city, this road going north and south, east and west. The whole city covering over 400 acres. Remains of a drain pipe system here off the roof. A lead funnel and a pipe going down the wall to a cistern for water storage. You can see where there are still remains of stucco covering up the stone walls to make them nice and smooth. Here in this storage area you can see amphorae for storing wine that have been covered. Statues that were original decorations in houses saved here. An original bronze casket. The plaster cast of another person who died here. And yet another in that
I think you have the reels.
typical position showing that they are dying of poisonous gases from the volcano. And at the top of this column, the remains of an ancient sundial. Our last stop before heading back to the entrance is this temple with fluted columns made of brick. It's a very hazy day, but off in the distance, across the modern city of Pompeii, you can see the slopes of Mount Vesuvius not that far away. We could spend literally days here exploring the many streets and side streets and houses and homes and businesses, but we're almost out of time. Here is the Temple of Apollo, or at least the remains of it, and what it looked like originally. Here is a perfectly preserved, beautiful bronze statue that was found here. There's another bronze statue missing a hand. The gnomon on this sundial says it's 11 o'clock, and I'm looking at my watch and it says 11:02. So after 2,000 years, it still works properly. It looks like there off in the distance is one building with the roof still intact. The stones at the end of this street indicate that chariots and horses can't come any further into the center square where there's only pedestrian traffic. There's still excavation going on here. It's said that in another 100 years they'll have it completely excavated. That is, unless Vesuvius covers it up again. It's late afternoon, almost sunset, and we're headed north toward Livorno, where we'll get tomorrow morning. We're just passing the islands of Ischia. The sea is just like glass as we head at about 20 miles an hour toward our port tomorrow morning. It's the first day of November, and early this morning we docked in the Italian port of Livorno. Right next to us is this fortification where I suspect the old edge of the water used to be. Today surrounded by docks and terminals. Livorno is one of the largest seaports, and from here we'll be boarding a bus this morning to go to the town of Pisa. Well, here we are in the town of Pisa with a remarkable number of tourist stalls owned by Senegalese and African art on display. And we have arrived in the Piazza del Duomo. There's the famous tower. There are an amazing number of shops all along the street that borders the piazza. And lots of people pretending they're holding up the tower. The cathedral here dates back to 1063, 3 years before the Battle of Hastings. The old city walls go all around the edge of the cathedral square. Elaborate carvings in the columns. Beautiful stained glass windows inside the large baptistry. depicts the 12 apostles. 12 columns support the huge dome. And in the center, a huge octagonal baptistry for total immersion. If you look very carefully, you'll see that the baptistry is slightly out of line too, tilted slightly toward the right. There's a service going on inside the Cathedral of St. Mary of the Assumption, so I won't be able to talk inside. But we'll see the actual suspended chandelier that Galileo observed gently swinging and formulated his laws of pendulums. The bronze door's bas-relief sticks out so much it's almost separate sculptures. And at last we get to the famous Leaning Tower itself.
I don't see back in art.
They're coming, they're at the very back, yeah.
Taking a little walk through some of the rest of Pisa. This is the University District for the University of Pisa. This palace of the Medicis is elaborately decorated. And it's now part of the University of Pisa. It's a special school for the gifted. This is where Enrico Fermi graduated. Well, this morning we find ourselves in an unexpected port. It turns out that the swells coming in from the sea at Portofino were so large that they made getting on and getting off the boat from tenders too dangerous. So instead, we have diverted to Genoa. This is Italy's largest port. The town itself rests on a hillside sloping down to the water. On first glance, there seem to be an extraordinary number of high-rise apartment buildings filling all the slopes. There are quite a few yachts here at the waterfront. And they seem to be about equally numbered between sailing boats and motor yachts, some of which are quite large. So we'll take a walk around town today and see what there is to be seen in Genoa. Right here along the waterfront there is a huge maritime museum and lots of interesting little workboats for fishing. And old fortified towers have been converted or incorporated into more modern buildings. The broad drive along the waterfront itself has been overwhelmed by the addition of a overpass freeway going all the way along the waterfront. But between the freeway and the waterfront, new development has made it still a very attractive place, with shops and pedestrian malls all the way down to the water. Just next to the new shops is a full-size reproduction of an old galleon. All of its rigging. Cannons sticking out of the gun ports. A huge old-fashioned anchor hanging off the side, and probably the most elaborate figurehead at the bowsprit that I've ever seen. This is a really large ship. This particular one was used in a film called Pirates, done by Roman Polanski. Out on pilings, making it look like it's floating on the water, is this big glass sphere. Il Biosphere, which is a tropical greenhouse with all kinds of tropical plants and birds growing inside, a tourist attraction that you can buy tickets to. One of the things I'm finding interesting about Genoa is the juxtaposition of old buildings with new buildings and new structures. This interesting old church on Via San Lorenzo is done in alternating layers of light and dark marble. We're going to take a walk up this street and see if we can find the house Christopher Columbus lived in. Lots of interesting little side streets going off the Via San Lorenzo. I wish I could capture the wonderful smells of food cooking. These side streets are so narrow that people across the street could almost reach out and hand somebody something in a building across the street from them. We're only about 4 or 5 blocks uphill from the edge of the water, and we are coming to one of the old gates of the city. This is interesting. This seemingly elaborate building with the columns is really totally flat. All of the columns and the decorations around the window are just painted on. Right here in the middle of this bustling part of the city, set aside all by itself, is the house where Christopher Columbus lived. Just next to it, there is a small section of the old city preserved, including this old gate. It's right next to a huge parking lot for motor scooters. We keep encountering these little open places and plazas where there are outdoor restaurants set up. Although it's the beginning of November, it's still very warm and pleasant. Temperature probably in the 70s now. Back down toward the waterfront of this Palazzo or palace. It's hard to tell what's painted and what's real. All the wall is painted except for this part, which is real. We'll head back down this waterfront street toward the boat. We'll set sail after sunset tonight on a short hop, and tomorrow morning we'll be in Monte Carlo, leaving Italy. behind.